Thank you, Debbie. Enjoyed that. And Sherry, thank you for the story. Anybody tell me what's special happening this week? Is there anything special happening this week? Your anniversary. Happy anniversary. Selima's birthday. Which day is that? This coming Friday. Happy birthday. What's happening? New Year. When is that? Do you know what day that is? Tomorrow. It's not tomorrow. Two days from now, it'll be on Monday, will be the new year. Tomorrow is the last day of 2023, and Monday will be the first day of 2024. Now, when you have a birthday or an anniversary, the next day, really, do you usually feel different the next day? Well, I guess it depends on what you did the night before. There are some people feel very different on New Year's than they did on New Year's Eve. I don't have that condition, that problem. A lot of times my eyes are closed on New Year's at the beginning of the day. Sometimes not, but I'm not one of these party persons that usually stays out every hour. I have sometimes stayed up and watched, the ball drop on television or done something like that. But it's going to be a new year. We're closing this year. And I'd like to call our message today, Closing the Gate. There was a time, a number of years ago, a famous journalist was playing golf with a friend of his who was also famous. It was Lloyd George. He actually at one time had been Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, many years ago. And they were out playing golf together, and the journalist was anxious to hear every word that Lloyd George would say, and so he was paying attention. They came as they were going along. It was kind of a backcountry golfing area, and they came to a gate that they went through. Somehow, part of their golf course was part of a pasture, and there were cattle there. So they kept a gate closed, and they went through, and this journalist was so intent on listening to Lloyd George that he pushed the gate closed, but he didn't get it fastened securely. And Lloyd George saw that and went back and closed the gate, fastened the wire around the top of the post, and made sure it was closed entirely. And then Lloyd George told him, the gate should always be closed behind you. Well, Lloyd George was telling his friend about this story of a doctor friend of his who had, he knew he was dying, and he had his kids, and his sons and daughters, and everybody came together around his bed. And this doctor was telling them things that would be helpful for them to remember after the doctor had passed away. And he said there were some words that this doctor said that have always stuck in my mind. He told his sons and daughters, always remember to close the gate behind you. Did any of you ever get taught that? Yes, I grew up on a farm for a number of years, and that was always important, especially when there's animals in there. I found somebody I went to go and check with for Bible studies. They have dogs in their yard, and there's a gate there too. I never did go through the gate. They were not friendly-looking dogs, and I decided that I would stay outside the gate Fortunately, the people had put a doorbell on the fence outside on the gate that I didn't want to go through because those mean-looking dogs were there. But if I had gone through, I would have wanted to make sure that the gate was closed. And when Lloyd George and this journalist went along and went into the other field in that part of the golf course, there were cattle in one field, and they did not belong in the new field. And so it was important to close the gate. I wonder if there are some things in our lives from this past year that we need to close the gate on and leave them behind. There are some things probably in the year 2023 that you can remember and say, that's really not something I want to take with me into 2024. Things that happened. I know some people that have had serious illnesses in 2023. They don't want to take that illness across into the new year if they possibly can help it. One of the things that we might think about leaving and shut off from the old year might be grief. Some of you may have lost family members that have passed away, an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent, a child, a spouse, and someone that was dear to you, and they passed away, and you've just been hurting so much. Maybe it was been 2-3 years. It takes time for grief to subside. I never want to be a person who says, oh, just shut it off, don't worry about it. Because grief takes time to let go of. But maybe it's time. Maybe it's time to close the gate on that and move on from there. Another thing that may need to be shut off is a hurt that you've experienced this past year. I don't know if there's anybody here that somebody, a family member, maybe one of your children says to you, I don't love you anymore. Or maybe it's a spouse that has said something like that. Or maybe a church member that said something mean to you. And they said, I don't know why you come to church. You're just a big hypocrite. And that hurt. Have you ever had somebody say something? Anybody here ever had something mean said to you? Oh, there's a few of you anyway. Yeah. Have any of you ever had somebody say something to you that really wasn't true about you? Yeah. And, sometimes it is true. I've had people say things to me that hurt, and inside I knew it was true. I didn't want to admit it, but it hurt. Sometimes we hold on to those for many, many years. I may have told you before, early in my ministry, I pastored at Sunnydale Academy in Missouri. And in the course of visiting different members of the church, I discovered an older gentleman. He was a farmer there. And I found out that his sister lived only 5 miles away, and they had not spoken to each other for over 25 years. That's a long time. Because the sister had said something that hurt this man. I don't know. Maybe it was the other way around. Anyway, they hadn't spoken for all these years. And the man happened to be dying at the time. And he says, would you please go get my sister and bring her to me? I'd like to speak to her. And I did. I went to go see the sister, and I says, your brother is dying, and he would really like for you to come and see him. And she said, he knows where I'm at. If he wants to talk to me, he can come here. And she wasn't really even eager for that. And I could stop there, but I will say that finally she did go to see her brother. And there was some sort of reconciliation. I don't know that it was a real great one, but at least it was a relief to the brother. He wanted to get this off his chest, and he was not at a point where he could go out anywhere. He was pretty much bedfast by that time. Why did he wait so long? Why do we do that? Somebody says something cruel to us. They say something that hurts us deeply. And I've known people that have stopped coming to church because somebody in the church said something unkind to them. Or they'll sit on the opposite side of the church. They won't interact at all. I always think that's kind of sad. But we're human. Our feelings get hurt. I wonder if I were to ask you, have you ever said anything or done anything that hurt somebody else's feelings? I would guess that there are probably a few of you that would have to raise your hands, maybe all of us. I have. I've said things, oh, how I wished I could have taken those words back. Such an appropriate story this morning. But can you take it back, the toothpaste back into the tube? No. Major accomplishment to do that. Very difficult. And so we can't take back. And there are times, even this last year or two, things I've said, oh, I wished I hadn't said it. I just wished I hadn't said it. I was helping with some evangelistic meetings in Florida just while I was a seminary student. And there were a couple of young men that were coming to the meetings. They were, does anybody remember what a hippie is? Some of you older ones know what a hippie is. These were long-haired dudes that, often didn't bathe very often. They had a fragrance, an odor about them. And these two young men, I would consider them hippies. And they started coming to church. They came to the evangelistic meeting. And I don't know what attracted them and brought them there. Probably it wasn't Revelation Seminar. I don't know. But they came to the evangelistic series, and then they started coming to the church. And I remember being in that church in Miami, Florida, up in the balcony. And these two guys came up, one of them in his tank top type shirt, jeans with patches on them, straw hat with patches. And they sat down in a couple of seats there. I heard these two elderly Christian ladies that came up. Do you know what happens, young people, when you get old? What happens to your hearing? Sometimes it gets weaker, doesn't it? My wife tells me that my hearing is getting weaker and weaker. There's only certain things I hear her say. Well, these two elderly ladies, they couldn't hear very well. And another thing that happens when you can't hear very well is you talk louder for your friend. And they were coming up there, and they looked and saw those two guys sitting in the place where they usually sat. And one said to the other, "They're sitting in our pew." It's quite loud. I was embarrassed. And I thought, these young guys, they're just visiting church. Why can't, there were a lot of other seats. Why couldn't those ladies sit somewhere else? No, but that was their place. And I don't know if the guys heard it or not. And I thought, oh, what an inappropriate thing to have said. But then just a couple days later, I was with one of the guys, and he said, I've been thinking about all these spiritual things we've been hearing. And he knew that we came from Andrews University. And we were studying for ministry. And he said, I'd like to go to Andrews University and learn to be a minister. And I thought, well, that's great. And then he asked a very unusual question. He says, do you think I could wear jeans there? Well, that's no big thing today. Not a big thing at Southern, is it, to wear jeans? No, everybody wears jeans, or, they aren't. And do they even wear jeans with holes in them? Not back in my day. Jeans were not really accepted very much. They wanted you to wear dress clothes on Andrews University campus. It was a spiritual place. And if you're going to be in a spiritual place, you better dress spiritual. Well, he asked if he could wear jeans, and I looked at his jeans, and they had patches on them. And what did I say? Well, you could wear jeans, but you probably couldn't have the patches. And he looked at me, and he says, man, those patches cover holes. Now they don't wear patches over them. They just wear the holes. In fact, you pay more for those kinds of clothes. Not then. And I saw that look on his face. Disappointment. Oh, how I wished I hadn't said that to him. I wished I hadn't said that to him. Have you ever said something to somebody and wished you hadn't said it? I've done it. I wish I could say that was the last time. There are times I've said things to my wife, and then I said, oh, that was not something I wanted to say. I could see that it hurt her. Now, why would it bother me that it hurt my wife? Because I love her. If she'd been a stranger on the street, it would have bothered me, but not near as much. But because I love my wife, I didn't want to hurt her. Sometimes we say things to brothers and sisters in the church, and we aren't really setting out to hurt them. It's just that we spoke before we thought. Maybe we need to shut off the hurt. Maybe we need to say, hey, let's let that be in the past. Maybe we need to give forgiveness. And perhaps we need to give forgiveness even before it's asked for. Is that possible? Like that brother and sister I told you about. And she thought that he needed to apologize before she could forgive him. Maybe we need to give forgiveness. Maybe we need to get forgiveness and accept forgiveness. If we carry that grudge over into the new year, I think it will damage us in our future relations with that person and with God. Now, this morning, we heard from Philippians chapter 3. Thank you for Laszlo for reading for us. From Philippians chapter 3, the Apostle Paul was writing to the Philippians here, and he said he hadn't arrived yet at his goal. He said, I haven't already become perfect. But he says, I'm going to keep pressing forward, and I'm going to take hold of what Christ Jesus took hold of me. He says, brothers, I do not consider myself to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, I forget those things that are behind, and I strain toward what is ahead, and I press toward the mark to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus, forgetting what is past and straining toward the goal. There are some things that we may need to forget or put aside. Don't let it hang around in our brain all the time, Put it back somewhere. Leave it behind us. Don't carry it into the future. Start with a fresh page. Get rid of those old things. Forgive others that have hurt us. Get serious about Jesus. Maybe we've been on the outside or on the periphery of the church. And it's time for us to have a meaningful relationship with Jesus. It's time for us to move into the center and stop hanging around the skirts of the church to get to the heart of Jesus. In Titus, the first chapter, the Apostle Paul told Titus to do something very special. Titus was facing something phenomenal, and Paul says to Titus, set in order the things that are lacking, that are wanting. Apparently, there were some things in the church there. In his young life, there were some things that were really not the way they should be. And Paul said, set those things in order. Now, there's probably not everything we can set in order. By the way, do you think you can set in order the problems in our country? No, that's not something that you can do. Can you set in order if you think the president has been making bad decisions? Can you set him in order? No, you can pray for him. There are some things we can't do, but if it has to do with me, there are some things I can do to set it in order. I can offer apologies or ask for forgiveness. I can change those things. There's sometimes even people that we've hurt or that have hurt us, and they don't even know it. I've been amazed at that through the years, that somebody said something, and they didn't even think about it as being something offensive. One time I had to go to one of the leaders in my church. She was the treasurer of the church, if I remember right. And she had not agreed with what I thought was the best way to do things in handling the finances of the church. And I had built up a resentment to her. I didn't even want to see her. Sad. And I finally went to her and I said, Madam Treasurer, I used her name. I said, I have to confess something. I've been feeling a lot of anger towards you, and it's not right. And I'm sorry. Would you please forgive me? Now, I could have said, you need to change some things. But you see, I was the one that was in the wrong. And I knew it, and I needed to go to her and ask her to forgive me because I was harboring ill will, and I didn't want that in my life. Maybe we have some things that need to be set in order. I'm told that the Italians used to have a custom that as New Year's Eve came along, in the streets of their cities, people vacated the streets. There were no cars parked on the street. There was nobody walking on the sidewalks. Even the cops would be gone. Nobody was out there. And when midnight came, the windows flew open, and these Italians threw stuff out their windows that was something they didn't want. Old furniture, trash, broken things, things that were useless to them. They just threw it out on the street. Anybody that was below the windows, these were often 2-story houses, and, they would get clunked on the head. They knew better. And then they would be shouting and shooting off fireworks and celebrating because they had gotten rid of the junk. I don't know if that's still done in some of those European countries or not. But it's kind of a good idea. Maybe it's a good idea for us to take the junk, the stuff that has hurt us in the past, the stuff that doesn't belong in our life, and just pitch it out the window and get rid of it as we approach a new year. Make room for the new. Get rid of the old. we should have a spiritual house cleaning. Now, we don't need to wait for spring cleaning, but we can wipe out of our life and out of our minds anything that's preventing us from attaining our goal of Christ-likeness and full surrender to Jesus. Jesus has high expectations for us. And maybe this is the year that we need to be making a decision for Jesus. Maybe it's the year that we need to be baptized. Maybe it's the year we need to step out in faith and do something for the Lord. Maybe start a Bible study with another person. Maybe God is calling you to step out and help out with one of the children's divisions of Sabbath school. Maybe God is telling you, hey, you've not been really faithful in returning tithe. And it's time for you to do it. Step into a new year. Be faithful. Maybe you need to start doing a daily devotion, spending a little time reading the Bible or a devotional book or something that draws your mind to God. Maybe it's time to make a new habit of doing that, or reading the Bible through. Maybe there's something you should be doing for Jesus. Are you willing to close the gate on the old? I mean, you can't change it. You can't pull the toothpaste back in the tube, can you? But you can do something new. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 38, Hezekiah has been very ill. And God sends a message to him. It says in Isaiah 38, verse 1, in those days Hezekiah became ill and was at the point of death. And the prophet Isaiah, son of Amoz, went to him and said, this is what the Lord says. Put your house in order, because you're going to die and you're not going to recover. Do we need to have our house in order? Probably most of us have not had somebody tell us, you know, you're about ready to die. But I know just a little over a year ago, Brother Robert was told, you're dying. I'm so thankful he's still here. But, you know, I sense as I visited with Robert and Mary from time to time that there were things that he was doing to put his house in order. Maybe business things, financial things, to help kind of ease the transition when he wouldn't be here. It's important to put our house in order. What would happen if you left church today and this week you died? Does anybody know that won't happen? No, we don't know. There are people last Sabbath that expected to live for a long time, and they are dead today. We don't always know. Would we be ready? Do we have some unfinished issues? Every attorney knows that before the closing, you need to get all the paperwork in order. And we don't know when the closing is going to be. Would we be ready today? Maybe today is the day we need to commit our life to Jesus Christ. Maybe we need to close the gate. Would it do any good to close the gate on an unmended fence? A fence that had broken down? No. That wouldn't do much good, would it? And so maybe sometimes there are things in our lives that do need to be in order, and Jesus can help us to know that. Boyd Hilton lived in North Carolina. And for some reason, he sensed that he was not going to live long. He didn't know when that time would come, but he sensed, and it wasn't very long after that that he did die. But in the process, he remembered things that needed to be done. He was getting up in years, and he knew that there were things that he lived in an old house. It was one that his parents had built. And they had had it originally surveyed, but that had been 80 years before. And nobody knew where the boundaries were. And so he called a surveyor to come and resurvey it while he was still alive, and where he had a good idea those markers were, so he could tell. And so he got that all done. And then he made out his will. And then he died. He was only 65 years old. Now, I don't think that's very old. Although other people have different ideas. I had a 6-year-old granddaughter this week, and can you imagine? She looked at me and she says, "You're an old grandpa." What does a 6-year-old know? She's entirely right. Do you know some people do things to prepare for their death? I've known some people that they buy their grave plot before they're dead, so that's all taken care of. It's not necessarily a bad idea. I won't ask if any of you already own the plot for your burial, but it's not a bad idea. Some people have had their name engraved on a headstone, a marker, their name and their date of birth. I don't know of very many that have put their date of death on it because we don't know that. Although I did hear about a man in Colorado that he was so concerned about what was going to be said about him at his funeral that he hired a preacher, he hired mourners, he bought a casket, and he crawled in the casket and laid there and had friends come in so that he could have his burial service and he could hear what the preacher had to say about him. Now I'd say that he was a little out to lunch, or maybe he hadn't had any. I don't know. He was a little strange. But it was in a paper. I read about it. And so we don't know when that time might come. But we need to make preparation, don't we? If we make that kind of preparation for our death, don't you think it's even more important to make preparation for our passing into eternity and for meeting our Savior? In 2 Samuel, the 17th chapter, there's the account of Ahithophel, who was a counselor in King David's kingdom. And just before his death, it says that he put his house in order. Do we need to do that? Just before Jesus' death, he set his house in order, not until all was complete and fulfilled. Did he die on the cross? John 19, verse 28 says, knowing that all was now completed. And then he was able to die on the cross. Not until he knew in his mind that everything was done would he die on the cross. Everything was completed. His house was in order. Do we need to get our house in order? As each year ends, a wonderful opportunity presents itself to the Christian. It's a time to disconnect from the bad habits. Maybe somebody here is chained by the habit of tobacco. Maybe you're hooked on alcohol, or maybe you are controlled by drugs. Perhaps food is your hang-up. For some of you, it's pornography. Maybe you're tied down by a spirit of criticism. Perhaps at home you yell at your kids, and yet in church, everybody thinks you're a wonderful person. But your kids know. Our spiritual life can sometimes be a facade, and our kids know it. Why not shut the gate on that way of life today? And let's begin this new year differently. You need to make that change now, because the clock of life, remember when we used to have to wind clocks? And you had to, it would run down, you have to wind it again. We don't have to do that anymore unless it's a certain kind of clock. But we are wound only once. And we don't know when the winding will end. Psalm 95 verse 7 says, "Oh, that today you would listen to his voice." Someday we're going to meet an old man, an old woman. It might be 10 years from now, maybe 20. For some of you, it might be 30 or 40 years, and you'll meet an old man. He might be a seasoned, soft, and gracious man, a gentleman who's grown old gracefully, one that's surrounded by a lot of good friends who look up to him with honor and respect, or, he might be a sour old codger, person who doesn't have very many friends at all, not much honor to his name, a friendless loner. And you know what? Who that old man, that old woman will be? The man or woman you see when you look in the mirror. Maybe you're already an old person. I found out I'm an old person. I don't know how somebody could say such a thing. Can you? I'm glad John agrees with me. But you know what that old person is going to be made up of? All the little things that happen in our lives now. If we are a thoughtful, caring, respectful young person, middle-aged person, if we do kind things all through our life now, you know what? When we come to that point where we look in the mirror and we see an old person, that's the kind of person we're going to be. But if we are always complaining, if we're griping about stuff, if we're criticizing other people, if we're not a nice person to be around, now, when we get to that place a few years from now, that's the kind of person we're going to be. Now, I've met both kind of persons. I probably told you about the old man that told me one day when I went to visit him. He says, "Pastor, I am sorry you are so stupid." Not most people. Most people aren't quite that bold. They might think it, but they don't say it. He said it. I asked him one day, "Chester, how long has it been since somebody gave you a hug?" He couldn't remember. I said, "Would it be okay if I gave you one?" "Well, okay." He was not a happy man. If we're unselfish today, if we live a wonderful God-fearing life, we have family devotions, we pray, we're likely to become that person that will look more and more like Jesus, the kind of person Jesus wants us to be. The little decisions we make today will someday harden into our character. So I want to close the door on criticism. and meanness. And I want to meet that old man that's thoughtful and gentle and somebody that people can look up to. Galatians 6, verse 7, now I'd like for you to think about this. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. It's the analogy of planting, seed in a field, sowing wheat. And if you're going to sow wheat, do you expect to go out and harvest corn? No. You expect to reap what you have sown. If you have sown criticism and you've become critical, that's what's going to stick in your life. No gate, though, I want to assure you, is too difficult for us to close. We can close these gates through the power of Jesus Christ. Nothing is impossible with God. Nothing is so entangled that it can't be straightened through Jesus. No human relationship is too strained that God cannot bring about reconciliation. No habit is so deeply rooted that Christ can't deliver us from it. No vice is so entrenched in our lives that it cannot be conquered. And so I think God calls us today, shut the gate on those bad habits, the drugs, the alcohol, the smoking, the overeating, the sexual impurity, the lashing out at people, whatever it is. Let's shut the gate on selfishness and fault-finding and shut out that critical spirit and pray for a positive attitude. I read of a man who went on a bicycle trip on the Virginia Creeper Trail. For 30 miles, the old railroad track bed winds through the woods and down a high mountain. And at one point, there's a little town, and then it goes, it's kind of an old railroad bed, but it was a nice place to ride. And this man was going along, and he'd gone into this field. He'd opened the gate and was careful to close the gate behind him. And as he was going through, there was a buckeye tree growing right beside the trail. Well, he had grown up in Indiana, and he loved buckeyes. Now, hopefully he knew that buckeyes are poisonous for humans to eat. But he loved the look of them, at least. And sometimes if you gather them and prepare them properly, they're roasted and bleached and, whatever, they can be edible. But he was under this buckeye tree when he happened to look up across the field, and he saw a group of cows. And amidst the cows, there was this bigger cow that had horns, and he, realized that it was the bull. He was probably 1,000 pounds of bull. And this bull was looking at him, and then this man looked down at himself and saw that he was wearing red. And something clicked in his mind, and he says, you know what? This is not a good place for me to be. And he looked around to see where the next gate was and decided it would be good to get that direction. And he watched as that bull came toward him with his big horns. And fortunately, he got through the gate and closed the gate behind him. And he felt really good being on the other side of the fence. Would you like to really feel good about your spiritual life? Are there some things you need to leave behind on the other side of the gate? 1 Timothy 5, verse 24 speaks to people who have a severe sin problem. It says that their sins will trail behind them. Can we look behind in our life and see a trail of sin back there that we've left along the trail? Somehow we need to shut off that pattern of sin, and we need to sever ourselves from the old life. Some things that we need to leave behind that aren't right, like the big bad bull. Maybe somebody here is goring their family, snorting around the house, and nobody else really knows it except the family. It's time to leave that behind and ask God to help you change. As you enter the new door of a new year through the power of our Savior, Jesus Christ, you can shut out everything that's preventing you from becoming what Jesus wants you to be. Any objectionable trait of character, it can happen. Do you remember when the children of Israel were ready to cross the Red Sea back in Exodus chapter 14? They'd come out of Egypt, they'd escaped, and they came to the Red Sea, and the Egyptians were following them. And of course they were scared. There were mountains on either side. There was the sea in front of them. Where would they go? And God, the angel came. And the angel caused a barrier, a dark cloud, to separate the Egyptians from the Israelites so they couldn't find them. They prayed, these people prayed for God to help them. And God set up a barrier so that they could not be found. And then God opened up a dry path to lead them through across that Red Sea and shut them away from the Egyptians. And then God destroyed the Egyptians. You know, God can shut things off for you too. He can deliver you. He can bury your old problems. They'll never rise again. Maybe we're pursued by grief, by sorrow, by sins, by bad habits, undesirable character. But the good news is that we have a God that not only wants to lead us to heaven, but He will become our back door and shut the gate and help us shut the gate to any of these objectionable things in our lives. God wants to do that for us. I don't know about you, but I want to pray that God will help me to shut off anything in my life that ought not be there. I want to honor Jesus. Don't you? I want to honor Him in my life. In Isaiah 52, verse 12, it says, "The Lord will go ahead of you, and the God of Israel will be your rear guard." Not only in front, but behind. And He'll go back there and keep the forces of the past from coming back into your life. God is a gate-closing God. Just before the book of Revelation closes, chapter 22, verse 11 is a text that tells us that someday God is going to close the gates of eternity. And we can't open it anymore. In fact, it's what we call the close of human probation. Revelation 22, verse 11, it says, "He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. He who is filthy, let him be filthy still. He that is righteous, let him be righteous still. He that is holy, let him be holy still." Comes a point where we can't make the switch. I don't know when that's going to be. But soon, that's going to happen. And I want to have the gate closed behind me. I want to be on the right side of the fence. On the right side with Jesus. I want to be with those who love Jesus more than they love the world. I think that's the side to be on. So as you go home today, I want you to be thinking about if your life is in order. Get your house in order. Put Jesus first in your life. Invite Jesus to take charge of your heart. If you have not been baptized, I encourage you to make that decision to be baptized. Whatever it takes to be ready and establish that, close the gate on the devil and walk into the open door of a new life with Jesus. And I want to do something I don't often do. I want to make just a little invitation this morning. If there's anybody who would like to plan to be baptized, you're not ready yet, maybe. We're not going to do it today, but you would like to make preparation for and plan for being baptized. I'd like for you to be brave enough to stand up and come here. Is there anybody like that this morning who would like to say, I'd like to plan to be baptized in this new year. I'd like to encourage you to come on, step up here. Anybody? I know there was somebody that talked with me at the beginning of the service and says, I've been thinking I would like to be baptized. Makes my heart happy. And makes me glad when Dad walks along. I'm so glad for those kind of decisions. Is there somebody else that says, I would like to make that decision? I haven't been baptized, and I'd like to do that. I'd like to become a part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Maybe there's somebody here that says, I have been baptized, but it's been a number of years ago, and I haven't been really living for Jesus. I think it's time for me to make a new decision to follow Jesus. And I need to be rebaptized. I'd like to encourage you to come forward too. Either way. Only God can bring that to our mind. I'd like to make that commitment, like for you to make that commitment today. Now, I want to make a more general call. If there are any of you that are here today that would like to recommit your life to Jesus Christ, I'd like to invite you to stand. You've been committed, but you'd like to make a recommitment. Beginning of a new year, end of an old year, you'd like to make that decision to be recommitted to Jesus. Father, you see who is standing today. There are some that are seated. Perhaps they're thinking about standing, but whatever your will is for our lives, I pray that you'll help us to shut the gate to the old and open it fully to Jesus Christ. Whatever decisions we are standing and making, maybe there's some old habit that needs to be gotten rid of. Maybe there's some new consecration that needs to come in. We need to keep growing. We pray that we'll meet, that we might all grow in Jesus Christ. And so I pray that you'll bless each decision. If there's somebody who has just been hard for them to make that move to come forward, but in their heart they know that's what they should do, please work in their heart and guide them until that decision is made. We thank you, Jesus, for not giving up on us, giving us another chance. Please bless us today. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.